The Moor fog was thick the morning Seth Cooper nearly died, and he would have gone over the edge of Harrow Bluff without even a decent last thought in his head if a green hand had not snatched him by the collar and hauled him backward with a force that knocked the breath clean out of him. He hit the damp heather on his back and lay there staring up at the gray sky while his heart tried to decide whether it was going to keep beating. The stone beneath his boots had simply crumbled, a section of the old survey ledge that jutted out over the 40-foot drop into the Grafin River below, the same ledge he had walked a dozen times this season to measure the crossing. He had not felt it give. One moment he was sighting along his plumb line toward the far bank, and the next there was nothing beneath his left foot and the world had tilted sideways. Then there was that hand. It had seized the back of his collar so hard the stitching screamed, and it had not simply pulled him to safety and let go the way a stranger rescuing a clumsy man from his own stupidity might do. It had held on. Even when he was flat on his back in the heather well away from the edge, even when the immediate danger was obviously past, those fingers stayed knotted in the fabric of his work jacket, tight and certain, as if whoever held him was making absolutely sure the world understood this man was not going anywhere. He finally turned his head. She was crouched over him, one knee in the heather, the other foot planted wide for balance, and she was looking at him with an expression he could not read at all, because he had never in his 28 years of life had a woman look at him quite that way, fierce and measuring, and something else underneath that he did not have a word for yet. She was an orc. That registered immediately, the way it always did, the broad jaw, the upswept tusks that curved just past her lower lip, the skin the deep green of old copper, the pointed ears visible through the thick fall of black hair she wore braided back from her face with small iron rings threaded through. She was dressed in fitted travel leathers, dark brown and well-worn, a sleeveless bodice laced tight over a long-sleeved undershirt of dark gray, the whole outfit following the lines of her figure with unself-conscious confidence. A short hunting blade rode her left hip. Her forearms were wrapped in leather vambraces stamped with a wolf head design, and she wore knee-high boots that had seen serious country. She looked like someone who lived outdoors not because she had to, but because it suited her. She looked, Seth thought from flat on his back, like someone who could snap him in half and would find the whole endeavor fairly boring. She also still had his collar. "Are you," she said, "entirely stupid, or is this what carpenters do for entertainment on the moor?" Her voice was low and precise, carrying the faint roughness that orc vocal cords often gave to common tongue, but there was nothing uncertain about it. She spoke the way she crouched, like someone who had thought about her position and chosen it deliberately. "I'm a millwright," Seth said, because apparently that was the first thing his brain decided was important to communicate while he was lying in the heather with his heart still slamming. "I'm surveying the crossing. The ledge crumbled." I saw that. She had not let go. Her knuckles rested against the back of his neck through the fabric. "You can let go now," he said, though he was not entirely sure he meant it. A beat passed, too. The fog moved slow and gray around them. Then unhurriedly she opened her hand and sat back on her heels, watching him the way a hawk watches something it has decided is interesting but not immediately edible. Seth sat up. He was fine. Shaken, mud on his elbows, missing his plumb line which had gone over the bluff with the crumbled stone, but alive in a way he had not quite expected to be 30 seconds ago. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with every bone in his body. She studied him for another moment, then rose to her full height, which was a solid 3 inches above his own 6 feet, and looked out across the Grafin Gorge with narrowed amber eyes. "The whole survey ledge is rotten," she said. "See the way the limestone undercracks along the eastern face. Frost heave over winter, then the spring floods undercut the base. You walk out there again and you will not get a second chance." Seth stared at her. Then he stood up, brushing heather from his jacket, and looked properly at the ledge. She was right. He could see it now that he knew to look, a dark horizontal line along the face of the bluff indicating where the stone had sheared. He should have seen it before he set foot out there. He had been focused on his measurements and not on the ground beneath him. "I see it," he said. "You know stonework." "I know moorland," she turned back to him. "I have been crossing this part of the Ashfen Moor for 3 years. The standing stones, the bluffs, the bogs. I know where it is safe and where it is not." "I'm Seth Cooper," he said, and extended his hand. He was not entirely sure what the custom was. He had met orc traders at market in Brackhill town and orc road workers along the King's Road, but he had never stood alone on a foggy moor with one who had just saved his life. She looked at his hand, then at his face, then she took it. Her grip was exactly as strong as he had expected, which was very strong indeed. "Kasha Darkwolf," she said, "I am traveling to Cairn Hallow. I heard there was a meeting of the Border Council." Seth let go of her hand slowly. "The Border Council," he repeated. He felt the cold move through him that had nothing to do with the morning fog. "You've heard, then?" "That Lord Fenwick has revoked the Ashfen Accord." She said it flatly, the way someone states a weather condition. "Yes, I heard, 12 years of truce, and he tears it up over a stolen horse." She paused, though the horse was a very fine one. "It will be open war," Seth said, "if the council doesn't stop it." Her amber eyes found his again. "Then you should hope the council is wiser than the Lord who calls it." She started walking away, south, along the ridge path. Her stride was long and unhurried, the kind of walk that covered ground without appearing to hurry. "I'm going to Cairn Hallow too," Seth called after her. He did not know quite why he called it, the words just came out of him. "I have a contract there. The council commissioned me to repair the old mill on the Heronvale stream before the summer. I've been doing survey work for the bridge first." She stopped but did not turn. "And the path through the Greymark cuts 2 days off the journey. But it crosses 3 standing stone circles, and since the accord's been revoked I wouldn't." He stopped, felt faintly ridiculous. "I could use a guide who knows the moor." Now she turned. She was looking at him again with that hawk-measuring expression. He got the distinct impression she could see things about him he did not particularly intend to show. "I am not a guide," she said. "I know. I do not charge less than a hunter's fee for guiding work. I don't have a hunter's fee on me, but I have smoked mutton and a full water skin, and I can build a fire that won't smoke, and I know enough about stonework to be useful if anything needs structural assessment." A very long pause. "You nearly walked off a bluff because you did not assess the stone under your own feet," she said. "Yes," he admitted. "I had my mind on the far bank." The silence stretched. A curlew called somewhere out in the fog. Then Kasha Darkwolf turned and started walking south again, but more slowly, and she moved at an angle that made it plain enough that if he kept his current pace, they would arrive at the same point on the path at the same time. Seth picked up his surveying satchel, checked that his tools were intact, and followed. They walked in silence for the better part of an hour, which Seth found easier than he expected. He was used to silence, used to long days alone on a site with nothing but the sound of his tools and the land around him. He had been a millwright's apprentice at 14 and working on his own since 22. He had built grain mills, sawmills, fulling mills, and 2 great water wheels that still turned on the Ardenvale River, and most of that work had been done with more company from stone and timber than from people. He was not unfriendly. He simply did not need a great deal of conversation to feel settled in someone's presence. Kasha seemed to operate by the same principle. She moved ahead of him on the narrow ridge path, reading the ground with the casual attention of someone who had done it so long it had become reflex, and she occasionally made a small gesture. A hand dropped back at her side, a slight turn of her head that he quickly learned to read as warnings. "There, do not step there. Go left of that stone. The bog is closer than it looks on the right." By the time they stopped at midday on a flat outcrop near a second bluff, this one solid limestone, not frost-cracked, he had learned to watch her hands the way he watched a compass needle. They ate facing south toward the distant dark shapes of Cairn Hallow's towers, which were just visible through the lifting fog. Seth shared the smoked mutton, and she produced dried flatbread from her pack and broke it without comment, putting half on the stone between them. They ate. A red kite circled overhead, riding a thermal that the fog was too thick for Seth to feel. "What does Lord Fenwick actually want?" Seth asked. It had been bothering him since he had heard the news 3 days ago, riding out from Brackhill town to start the survey work. The Ashfen Accord had been negotiated with blood and patience 12 years ago, a genuine piece of borderland diplomacy that had let the eastern moorland clans of the Orcs and the human settlement line coexist without the kind of raiding and burning that had characterized every generation before. Revoking it over one stolen horse made no sense. Kasha chewed, swallowed, looked at the kite. "The Darkwell seam," she said. "The coal and iron, or both." The survey from 2 winters ago showed the richest seam runs directly beneath the Greymark, the clan grazing land. Under the Accord, Fenwick cannot mine it without clan consent and a share of the yield. Without the Accord, she made a short gesture. He mines where he likes. Seth thought about that. And the stolen horse was convenient. The stolen horse was arranged. She said it without particular heat, as if this was just another condition of the landscape she had learned to navigate. One of Fenwick's outriders sold a clan man the horse for 3 silver pieces and a jug of spirits at the Brackhill market. 2 days later, it was reported stolen by Lord Fenwick's steward. The clan man had no bill of sale because the outrider knew he wouldn't think to ask for one. Seth looked at her. "How do you know all this?" "Because the clan man was my cousin," she said, "and he told me, right before he rode east to warn the warband." She was quiet for a moment. "Which is why I need to reach the Border Council before they do." The thing that Seth had initially taken as flat calm in her voice shifted slightly, and he heard what was underneath it, not panic, nothing so disorganized as that, but the controlled urgency of someone carrying very important weight over a long distance. "You're trying to prevent the war," he said. "I am trying to ensure that when the war band arrives at the council meeting, someone has already made the case that can be made." She looked at him directly for the first time since they had sat down. "Clan Darkwolf has prospered under the Accord. We have land, we have grazing. We have a market circuit that runs through 6 human towns. We have trade agreements that feed 300 people through winter. I will not watch Fenwick steal that from us by arranging a theft we cannot disprove, unless the council hears the alternative." Seth held her gaze. He had heard people talk politics before lords and aldermen and guild masters at negotiating tables where he was present only to give structural opinions about buildings, and most of them carried their arguments like shields, protective and defensive. Kasha Darkwolf carried hers like a load of stone she had accepted was her job to move. "What do you need from the council?" he asked. "A proper investigation. An independent surveyor's assessment of who has legitimate claim to the Darkwell seam." She paused. "And ideally, a millwright's testimony about the survey ledge at Harrow Bluff that Fenwick's men almost certainly used to conduct their initial mineral assessments without clan knowledge. Because if that ledge was accessed from Fenwick's side of the boundary line, it is evidence of trespass on clan land." Seth stared at her for a long moment. The kite had come lower, riding the thermal in wide, slow circles above the bluff. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the broken ledge I nearly walked off of this morning might be evidence that a lord engineered a war." "I am telling you it is consistent with that," she said carefully. "The limestone at that section of the bluff is underlain by a calcite vein. If Fenwick's geological man drilled test cores from the ledge to follow the Darkwell seam westward, the drilling would have fractured the frost-heaved stone. It would look like natural collapse." She met his eyes. "I noticed the drill marks this morning while you were lying in the heather deciding whether to be grateful." Seth realized his mouth had been open for several seconds. He closed it. He thought about the moment on the bluff, Kasha crouching over him with her fist in his collar, and he understood now that she had already been there when the ledge gave, had already seen the drill marks, had been close enough to grab him because she was examining the stone and he had simply walked onto a compromised survey ledge without looking. "You weren't just passing by," he said. "No, you were already gathering evidence." "Yes. And I walked onto your evidence." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one, maybe, a very controlled and private thing at the corner of her mouth. "You very nearly walked off it," she said, "which would have been inconvenient." He thought about the way her hand had held on, the extra seconds, the certainty. He looked down at the smoked mutton in his hand, and carefully did not read anything into that moment except what it was, which was a woman who had saved his life and had then held on a moment too long, and he was not the kind of man to build a palace out of a single stone. "I can testify about the drill marks," he said. "I know what mineral survey drilling looks like. I've worked enough quarry sites and mine mill contracts. If they're there, I can identify them for the council as clearly as a guild surveyor." She was very still for a moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, as if she had made a decision about something. "Then we travel together," she said, "and we reach Cairn Hallow before Fenwick's men close the road." Seth put his mutton away, stood up, and offered her a hand up from the stone, not because she needed it, which she obviously did not, but because it was the thing he did. She took it anyway. The game started that afternoon, though Seth would not have called it a game at the time. He would have called it two people who had decided to travel together, finding out whether the other one was serious. It began simply enough. The Greymark path required crossing a deep-cut drainage channel on a series of stepping stones, and Kasha, going first, hopped across them easily. Then she stopped on the far bank and turned to look at him with that measuring expression. "If you step on the third stone," she said, "it will shift and put you in the water. It is not deep. But your boots will be wet for the rest of the day." Seth looked at the stepping stones. He could see, now that she'd said it, that the third stone sat slightly differently from the others, a subtle angle, the moss on the near side crushed in a pattern that suggested it rocked. "You could have not told me," he said. "I could have," she agreed. He stepped across, skipping the third stone. He made it dry. He stopped on the near bank and looked back at her. "Your left vambrace lacing is coming undone," he said. "If it falls loose and you grab anything in a hurry, it will catch and cost you the use of the hand." She looked down at her left arm. The leather lace was indeed beginning to work loose at the lower edge. She relaced it briskly, without looking up. "Observant," she said, not quite a compliment. "I build things that have to hold weight," he said. "I notice when something isn't going to hold." They walked on. He noticed her watching him after that, not obviously, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in the way that a person does when they have changed their assessment of you and are updating it. He found he was watching her too, because she was genuinely extraordinary to watch. She moved through the moorland the way the moor itself moved, with a kind of patient inevitability. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. She read the landscape continuously, automatically, in a way that he recognized as the same thing he did with structures, an ongoing assessment of what is sound and what is not. They reached the first standing stone circle at dusk and made camp in its lee, which Kasha said was acceptable as long as they did not touch the stones themselves and did not kindle the fire inside the ring. She explained this matter-of-factly, not as superstition, but as local protocol. The stone circles were considered neutral ground under clan law, and using them for shelter was permitted. Using them as a hearth was considered appropriation of a marker. Seth had no objection. He was good with fire. He found a natural windbreak in the heather 30 yards from the ring, assembled a fire structure with the dry peat blocks and kindling from his pack that caught first time and burned without smoke. Kasha sat across from it and watched him build it the way she had watched him assess the stepping stone. "You are actually good at that," she said. "I've built fires on worse sites than this." He fed a second block onto the structure, careful of the air channels he'd left. "Old mill work sometimes means nights on site, remote sites. You learn. How long have you done this work?" "Since I was 14, apprenticed to a man named Wren Aldgate in Brackhill Town. He was the best millwright in the eastern reaches. He died 3 years ago. He trained you well. He was exacting and difficult and absolutely right about everything structural." Seth stared into the fire. "I miss him every time a build goes cleanly." Kasha was quiet. Then, My mother taught me to navigate the moor. She died 7 winters ago. A pause. I think of her when I find a line through the bog that is exactly where she said it would be. Seth looked across the fire at her. The flames made her amber eyes very bright, and the shadows gave the planes of her face a kind of severe beauty that he was aware of noticing and equally aware that he should not dwell on. "What is Cairn Hallow like?" he asked, shifting to safe ground. "I've never been further into the moor than Harrow Bluff." "Cold," she said, "even in summer. The castle sits on a basalt outcrop over the Heronvale Valley. The town is small, 400 people, maybe fewer now with the road traffic down since Fenwick started making noise. The mill you are contracted to repair will be the grain mill." Her mouth did the ghost of a smile thing again. "It has been non-functional for 2 seasons. The town has been grinding grain by hand. They will be very glad to see a millwright." "Is the millstone badly worn, do you know?" "The millstone is cracked. The wheel shaft is sound. The sluice gate is the problem. The lower bearing has rotted out and dropped the gate 3 inches, so the water is going around the wheel rather than through it." He blinked. "You know the exact failure mode." "I told you. I know this part of the moor." She fed a block of peat onto the fire with deliberate calm. "I stopped at Cairn Hallow a month ago. The miller told me. He is a man named Dovell who has been apologizing to the entire town for 2 seasons and is running out of patience." Seth was quiet for a moment, then slowly, "So the sluice bearing the millstone and the wheel shaft?" "Yes. The millstone I can sort if the crack is not too deep. There is a technique using lead fill and iron banding. The sluice bearing and gate alignment are straightforward timber work." He paused. 2 weeks of work, maybe 3. The council session runs for 10 days. He met her eyes across the fire. They were both thinking the same thing. He could feel it, the shape of an arrangement forming, something that made sense the way a well-planned structure makes sense, each piece in its right relation to the others. "If I'm there for the council and for the mill repair," he said, "I could give testimony about the drill marks and also give the town the mill back at the end of it. And I would have an independent witness whose professional assessment no lord can easily dismiss." She held his gaze. "A millwright who has also done mine mill and quarry work and knows mineral survey drilling." "Is that what you were thinking about when you grabbed my collar?" he asked, and he intended it as a light thing, a bit of humor to ease the weight of what they were deciding. She did not look away. "I was thinking," she said, "that I did not want you to fall." The fire crackled. Seth Cooper looked at Kasha Darkwolf across it, and had the precise feeling of standing on solid ground for the first time in a very long time, which was a strange thing to feel on a moorland in the dark with an orc woman he had met 6 hours ago, but feelings did not always consult with logic before arriving. "All right," he said. "We do this together." She nodded. And this time the ghost smile did not vanish immediately. It stayed a moment longer, just long enough to be sure he had seen it, and then she pulled her bedroll from her pack and settled herself at her side of the fire and closed her eyes. Seth lay back under the sky and looked at the stars where they showed through the moving fog, and thought about the way a hand could hold on after the danger was past, and eventually slept. The second day on the moor was when the dare escalated from practical to personal, and Seth understood later that he had started it without meaning to. They had been moving well through the morning when the path brought them to the edge of a narrow ravine, where a shepherd's rope bridge spanned 30 feet of nothing over a rocky burn 10 feet below. The bridge had been there for years. Clearly the rope was old and weathered, and 2 of the plank footholds had rotted out entirely, leaving gaps. But it held weight. Seth could tell because the anchor posts were solid stone, and the main suspension ropes were still good cordage despite the weathering. He tested the first plank, felt the ropes respond properly, and walked across without hesitating, the way any millwright who had spent his career on scaffolding and unfinished structures walked onto something uncertain, not carelessly, but without performing caution for anyone. He reached the other side, turned, and found Kasha had not followed. She was standing at the near end of the bridge, looking at it with an expression he had not seen on her before. It was not fear exactly. It was the specific face of someone assessing a risk and not liking the assessment. He almost said nothing. He came very close to simply waiting and letting her cross in her own time. What he said instead was, "The center section is the weakest. Stay on the rope rails, not the planks, for the middle third." She looked at him. Then she looked at the bridge. "I know that," she said. "Then why are you still on that side?" A pause that was slightly longer than comfortable. Then, "I have a thing about heights." Seth had not expected that. He could not have said what he had expected from Kasha Darkwolf, who had pulled him back from a 40-foot drop without flinching, but it had not been this. He understood immediately why she had not flinched at the bluff. She had been on solid ground. The bridge was different, 30 feet of moving, swaying, rope and timber suspension over a rocky burn. "All right," he said, keeping his voice completely level. He walked back out onto the bridge, a move that cost him something since he was already across and did not need to be here, and stopped at the quarter mark, well short of the weakest section. "Come to me," he said. "This section is sound. I'll tell you where to put your weight." She looked at him with an expression that was both deeply ungrateful and deeply relieved. She stepped onto the bridge. She moved differently than she moved on solid ground, more careful, more deliberate, and slightly too controlled, which actually created sway rather than reducing it. Seth stayed still and let the bridge settle. "Stop controlling it," he said. "Let it move with you. It is designed to swing." "I know that," she said again, and this time she sounded like someone who knew it intellectually and hated it practically. "I know you know it." He kept his voice steady and matter-of-fact, the way he talked to apprentices on their first scaffold work. "Move when I say, right foot, good, left, hold, right." She came to him one step at a time, and he moved backward in the same rhythm, guiding her through the worst section without making it a big thing, and when she reached the solid anchor of the far side, she let out a breath that she had been holding for most of the crossing. He said nothing about it. He just turned and started walking. After about 20 paces, she fell into step beside him instead of slightly ahead, which was where she had been walking until now. "I could have crossed it without help," she said. "I know," he said, "but you didn't have to." Another silence. Then, "That was kind. It was practical. We need to move fast, and I didn't want you spending an hour talking yourself onto a rope bridge." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You are a terrible liar, Seth Cooper." He smiled at the path ahead of him and said nothing. The rope bridge moment changed something between them, a loosening, a softening of the margins. They started talking more freely after that, the conversation moving between the practical and the personal in that organic way it does when two people discover they are genuinely interested in each other and have stopped being cautious about it. He learned that she was 26, 2 years younger than him. That she had been the clan Darkwolf's trade negotiator for 4 years, since the previous negotiator, an elder named Gort, had died, and she had simply stepped into the role because she was the one who could speak common tongue without an accent and read contracts. That she had 3 brothers, all warriors, all of whom thought her diplomatic approach to the Fenwick problem was dangerously naive. That she had a scar along her right collarbone from a knife fight at the Brackhill market 2 years ago, with a man who had not liked that an orc woman was renegotiating a grain contract in her clan's favor. That she had won the renegotiation, and he had lost the fight. He told her about Brackhill Town and the small house on the millwright's lane that he rented when he was between contracts. About the fact that there was almost always a contract because good millwright work was rare, and he had a reputation built on Ren Aldgate's teaching. About the way he felt on a completed structure, not proud exactly, more like a deep, quiet satisfaction, the feeling of something being exactly as it should be. About the fact that he had no family except a sister who had married a farmer in the western reaches, and whom he visited at the winter solstice, and who worried about him in a cheerful, practical way that he found very comforting. "She sounds like the right kind of person to have in your life," Kasha said. "She is. She is also convinced I am going to fall in love with someone unexpected, and it is going to rearrange my life, and she tells me this every solstice without fail." The words were out before he had checked them, and he felt the slight heat of having said something unintentionally pointed. Kasha glanced at him sideways, with an expression that was measuring again but softer than it had been at the start. "Unexpected," she repeated. "Her word," he said. "What is your word?" He thought about it honestly, the way he had learned to do from Wren Aldgate, who had considered honest thinking a professional obligation that extended into everything else. "I think I have been waiting for someone whose company feels like enough," he said. "Not too much, not too little. Someone I do not have to perform being comfortable with." The silence after that was the kind that says something has been understood. They reached the second standing stone circle at midday and stopped for water at the stream that ran past it. The standing stones here were taller than the first ring, rough dark granite, shoulder-high on Kasha and head-high on Seth, arranged in an oval that enclosed a roughly flat central area. He could see offerings at several of the stones, bundles of dried heather, a scatter of iron beads, a woven grass figure. Recent, some of them. "Clan offerings," he said. "Clan and some of the croft holders too," Kasha said, coming to stand beside him. "The stones predate both. They were here before my people came east and before your people came west, but we share the maintenance of them now." She was quiet a moment. "That is what the accord built on, shared maintenance. It is a small thing to build a peace on, perhaps. It is exactly the right thing to build a peace on," Seth said. "Shared maintenance is what keeps a mill running when two farms use the same water wheel. You do not need to like your neighbor. You need to agree that the wheel matters." She looked at him with something new in her eyes, not the measuring hawk look, but something more direct and personal. He held it because he had stopped pretending he was not noticing things. "I think," she said, "that you may be a better diplomat than you know." "I'm a millwright," he said. "We argue about water rights all day. It is essentially the same thing." She smiled at him then, a real one, not the ghost of one, wide enough to show her tusks properly and bring a crease at the corner of her eye. And Seth felt it land somewhere central and important and make itself at home. They pushed hard on the third day because Kasha had heard from a shepherd they passed, a weathered woman with two enormous dogs who nodded to Kasha and looked at Seth with cautious curiosity, that Fenwick's road wardens had closed the southern track out of Harrow Town. If the wardens extended the closure to the Greymark path, they would be cut off from Cairnhallow's back road entirely and forced to go the long way around through Ashfen village, which would cost them 4 days. So they walked long and they walked fast, and they talked less but were more present to each other in the way that working together toward an urgent goal creates presence. When the path narrowed, she moved ahead and he watched her hands. When it widened, he fell in at her shoulder, and she glanced at him occasionally in the particular way that meant she was checking he was keeping up, which he always was. At the midpoint of the third day, they came to the Harrenvale River. He heard it before he saw it, a deep, constant roar that was wrong for a moorland stream. When they topped the ridge and looked down into the valley, he understood why. The spring had been unusually wet across the eastern moor. Every shepherd and croft holder they had passed had mentioned it, and the Harrenvale had risen correspondingly. But what Seth was seeing was not a flooded river. What he was seeing was a river in full spate, brown and white, and carrying debris, uprooted heather, fence posts, something that might once have been a wicker fish trap, at a speed and volume that made crossing it look like an act of deliberate self-harm. The ford at Greystone Cross, which Kasha had been counting on, was under water by at least 4 feet. They stood on the ridge and looked at it. "The upper bridge at Millhaven Crossing," Seth said. He had studied the local map before starting the survey work. 3 miles upstream. It is a timber arch bridge built over the Narrows. "I know it," Kasha said. Her voice was careful. "I also know it is 3 years old and was built by Fenwick's estate carpenter, which means it was built to Fenwick's specifications." Seth looked at her. "Which means," she said, "it was built cheaply." They went upstream to Millhaven Crossing because it was the only option. What they found was a timber arch bridge that was, in fairness, still standing, but only just. The river here ran through a natural narrows about 40 feet across, and the bridge spanned it in a shallow arch of larch timber. Under normal conditions, it would have been fine. Under these conditions, the water was running at the bridge's lower chord, the current hammering the upstream face with continuous debris impact, and Seth could see even from the bank that 2 of the arch chord timbers had already cracked. "How bad?" Kasha asked. Seth studied it with the deliberate speed of someone who had assessed 100 structural failures and learned to be fast about it. The main arch ribs, there were 4 of them, were intact. The deck planking over them was intact. The 2 cracked chord timbers were in the secondary compression ring, which was load-bearing but not solely load-bearing. If they moved fast and stayed in the center of the deck where the main arch ribs ran, the bridge would likely hold. If they stopped, or if the debris impacts continued long enough to complete the fracture while they were on it, it would not. "We can cross it," he said, "but we cannot take time." "Straight across, center line, do not stop." She was looking at the bridge. He could see the same calculation running in her, the one about heights and unsound structures and moving water, and he understood that this was substantially worse for her than the rope bridge had been. "Tell me what to do," she said, and he heard the cost of those 4 words, a woman who was not accustomed to needing instruction, stating clearly that she needed it. "Right behind me," he said. "Match my pace exactly. If I slow down, you slow down. If I stop, which I will not, but if I do, you put your hand on my back and push, because I will mean I have frozen, and that is not useful. Do not look at the water." "I will not be looking at the water," she said, with a fragment of her normal dry certainty. "Good. Ready?" "Yes." He stepped onto the bridge. The deck vibrated immediately with the force of the current below it, a constant low-grade shudder that traveled up through his boots and into his knees. He kept his eyes on the far bank and moved steadily, not a run, which would stress the structure unevenly, but a quick, even walk with a stride that minimized vertical impulse. Behind him, he could feel Kasha matching him precisely, her footfalls landing in the same cadence as his own. They reached the midpoint. Below them, the water was thunderous, churning against the bridge's lower chord in a continuous assault of brown foam and debris. Seth felt the deck flex slightly, a deeper flex than it should, the 2 cracked chord timbers redistributing load. He did not stop. He adjusted his next step fractionally to keep his weight over the main arch rib and kept moving. Then the river sent a tree. It was not a large tree, an alder maybe 20 feet, with most of its branches still on it, but it came fast, turning broadside to the current as it hit the bridge's upstream face, and the impact was enough to shudder the whole structure violently. Seth heard the crack. Not the small, incremental crack of a timber taking on load. The decisive crack of a timber completing its failure. He knew what it meant before it was finished, and he moved, because the one thing 28 years had taught him about structural failures was that the time between the deciding crack and the collapse was always shorter than it felt. He grabbed Kasha's arm. She had already grabbed his, and they ran the last 15 feet off the bridge onto the far bank, and the bridge did not wait for them to be safely clear before it began to go. The downstream section went first, the cracked chord timber losing its last connection, the arch flattening, the deck planks cascading into the water in a long splashing roar. They were clear. Barely. Seth's back foot left the last plank a second before that plank dropped. They stood on the far bank while the Heronvale destroyed what was left of the Millhaven crossing behind them, and Kasha had both hands braced on Seth's arms. He was not sure when that had happened, and his heart was making the same argument it had made at Harrow Bluff, the one where it tried to evacuate his ribcage. "We are," Kasha said, with remarkable steadiness for someone who had just run off a collapsing bridge over a flooded river, "going to need to find a different way home." Seth laughed. He could not help it. It came out of him entirely without permission, startled out by relief and the absurdity of her phrasing. And after a moment she made that sound again, the one that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood, and they stood on the riverbank with her hands on his arms and the river roaring behind them. Then she pulled him forward, a short, decisive movement, the way she had pulled him back at the bluff but going the other direction, and she kissed him on the side of his jaw, quick and deliberate, and stepped back. He looked at her. Her chin was up, her expression was composed, but her amber eyes were doing something they had not done before, which was being honest in a way that cost her. "You got us across," she said. "In my people's custom, you acknowledge that. Is that what that was?" He asked because he was not entirely sure he was reading this correctly, and he wanted to be sure. She studied him for a long, careful moment. "Among other things," she said. "Yes." Seth Cooper looked at Kasha Darkwolf in the gray moorland light with the river roaring behind them and felt something settle into place in his chest with the solidity of a keystone going home. "Among other things," he repeated. "Do not make it strange," she said, and turned to start walking toward Cairn Hallow. He followed, grinning at her back in a way she could not see, and thought about keystones. They reached Cairn Hallow in the late afternoon of the fourth day, coming down into the Heronvale Valley from the northeast, along the ridge path that connected the clan's eastern grazing territory to the town. The view from the ridge was something Seth had not been prepared for, the basalt outcrop rising from the valley floor with the castle's dark towers above it, the river running clearer below the town than it had been at the crossing, the slate roofs of the town caught in afternoon light, and the standing stones of the clan's western markers visible on the opposing ridge. It was genuinely beautiful in the way that hard, elemental places are beautiful, not soft, not gentle, but true. Kasha was looking at it with an expression he had not seen before, something open and private at the same time. "Home territory," he said. "Close to it," she said. "Close enough." They came down into the town by the north gate, and the gate warden, a young human man with a pike he held the way someone holds a tool they are not sure they are going to use, looked at Kasha, and then at Seth with the specific combination of wariness and calculation that Seth had seen at every border settlement he'd ever worked. "Millwright Seth Cooper," Seth said, pulling out the sealed contract from his satchel. "I'm contracted by the council for the grain mill repair. She is with me." The warden looked at the seal. It was the border council's seal, which carried real weight in a place like Cairn Hallow, and opened the gate without further commentary. Kasha walked through without acknowledging the exchange at all, which Seth suspected was long practice. "Thank you," he said to the warden, because he was Seth Cooper and he said thank you to people, and the warden blinked like he had not been expecting that. The town of Cairn Hallow was small and cold and smelled of peat smoke and river water, and it was currently hosting what felt like twice its normal population of people, because the Border Council session had drawn representatives from every settlement in the Eastern Moor, human merchants and aldermen and minor lords, and a contingent of clan representatives that Seth saw camped in organized rows of hide tents in the open ground south of the town wall, near the river. A messenger found them within 20 minutes of their arrival. He was out of breath and dressed in the council's livery, a young man who had clearly been watching the north gate. "You're Cooper, the millwright," he said. "Yes. The council registrar wants your deposition first thing tomorrow. They've had word from Harrow Town that Fenwick has." He stopped, glanced at Kasha with the uncertain look, then back to Seth. "There's been an incident at the Darkwell seam. Fenwick's surveyors were found on the seam land overnight. One of the clan's outriders was injured." Kasha went very still. "How badly?" The messenger looked at her. "The registrar said to tell the clan representative, if one arrived, that the man is alive. He was struck with a surveying rod." He paused. "He'll recover." "Which clan representative?" Seth said. "Is she expected?" "There's a record of a Kasha Darkwolf filed as the clan Darkwolf negotiating representative under the accord. If that is me," Kasha said. "Tell the registrar I will attend the council session tomorrow morning and I will require my written submission filed tonight. Can you deliver documents?" "Yes, Keeper Darkwolf." "Good." She looked at Seth. "I need to go to the clan camp. Are you all right to find the miller on your own?" "I'll find him," Seth said. He hesitated then. "Kasha." She turned back to him. "Be careful who you trust in there," he said. "Before the council gives you an answer, someone may try to give you a different kind of answer." She looked at him for a moment with that considering expression, and he could not tell if she found the warning presumptuous or welcome. "I appreciate the concern," she said carefully. "It is not concern," he said, echoing her word from the bluff. "It is practical." The ghost smiled. "Among other things," she said, and walked away toward the clan camp. Seth found the miller Dovell exactly as described at his house near the grain mill on the eastern side of town. Dovell was a stocky man of about 50, with permanently flour-dusted hands, and the expression of someone who had been apologizing for 2 years and was exhausted by it. He showed Seth the mill by lamplight, and Seth walked the inspection with the deep pleasure of a man who has been told a patient needs surgery and has found the surgery perfectly clear and obvious. The sluice gate bearing was exactly where Kasha had said it was. The millstone crack was manageable, deep enough to need filling but not deep enough to threaten the stone's integrity. The wheel shaft was sound oak, not even beginning to rot. 2 weeks of work. Maybe 10 days if he pushed. "You can fix it?" Dovell asked, with the tone of a man who has heard this question answered incorrectly before. "I can fix it," Seth said. "I need the following materials." He produced a small notebook and wrote the list from memory: bearing timber, lead for the millstone fill, iron banding stock, hemp packing. "Where is the nearest timber merchant?" "The council has authorized materials purchased from the town stores," Dovell said. He was looking at Seth with new light in his eyes, the light of someone who has stopped being embarrassed and started being hopeful. "Everything on your list should be available. When do you start?" "Tomorrow afternoon. I have to give testimony in the morning." He found lodging at the Crow and Hammer in a stone building that had been there long enough that the walls had that settled into the ground look. He always trusted ate a dinner of salt mutton and black bread that was simple and good, and was nearly asleep when the knock came at his door. It was Kasha. She was out of the travel context, standing in the lamplight of the inn's upper hall, but she was still in her travel leathers because she had not changed: the fitted brown bodice, the iron ring braids, the wolf head vambraces. She looked exactly as she had looked on the moor, which was to say simultaneously formidable, and something else that Seth was no longer pretending not to notice. "My cousin is in the clan camp," she said without preamble. "He rode through the night after the incident at the seam. He says there are 6 of Fenwick's surveyors on the seam land and 2 road wardens providing armed escort, and they have begun drilling in 3 new locations." Seth sat up fully. "That is not a survey operation," he said. "That is an extraction operation. They are identifying drill points for the mine works." "Yes." She came in, uninvited but not unwelcome, and sat on the wooden chair near the window with the ease of someone who is too tired to perform formality. "The warband will be at the seam by morning if the clan elder gives the order, and if the warband meets Fenwick's wardens on clan land with drilling rigs between them, this council session will be over before it starts." "How much time do we have?" "My cousin says the elder will not move before dawn. He respects the council process enough to give it 1 night. She looked at Seth directly. "I need the drill mark evidence from Harrow Bluff to be in front of the council before any confrontation happens at the seam. If the council has evidence of prior trespass by Fenwick's surveyors, not just the current incident but a documented pattern, then the jurisdiction argument changes completely." "Then I need to write my deposition tonight," Seth said. "In detail. Describe the drill mark patterns, the location relative to the boundary line, the geology, the specific instruments that made those marks. I can do it. It will take 2 hours. "I will sit with you," she said, which was not a question. "I know," he said, which was not an answer. He wrote. She watched and occasionally asked a question, clarifying questions. Precise ones. The kind that a person asks when they are building a legal argument and need every joint to be tight. He described the Harrow Bluff drill marks with the full vocabulary of his trade, identified the tool type from the diameter and depth of the holes, located them relative to the established boundary markers he had been using for the bridge survey, and drew a diagram that cross-referenced them to the mineral vein direction that Kasha described from her own observations. By the time he finished, they were both leaning over the table at the same time, close enough that he was aware of the warmth of her. "This will hold," she said, reading back through it. A guild-qualified millwright with quarry and mine mill experience, identifying specific survey drill marks on clan land trespassed prior to the Accord's revocation. Fenwick's people will argue it is natural rock erosion. She pointed to a line in the text. This section where you describe the drill waste pattern, the stone dust distribution, is what closes that argument. Natural rock erosion does not leave radial waste distribution. "I know," Seth said. "That's why I put it in." She looked up from the document and found his face about 8 inches from hers, which happened when two people leaned over the same table and did not notice how close they had gotten. Neither of them moved back. "Seth," she said. "Kasha, I am not a simple woman," she said. "I do not do things simply." "I know," he said. "I'm a millwright. I like things that are built properly, not quickly." Her amber eyes were very close and very honest. "I have wanted to trust someone my own age for a long time," she said, and the straightforwardness of it, the complete lack of deflection, was more intimate than anything else she could have said. "Someone who does not look at me and see a problem to be solved or a force to be managed. Someone who looks at me and sees you," he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she reached up and put her hand along his jaw, the same deliberate, certain motion she used for everything, and kissed him properly. Not the quick acknowledgement at the river. This was something she had decided and was not hurrying. He kissed her back, equally. Not carefully, he was done being careful. He put his hand in her hair above the iron ring braids and felt her exhale against him like a tension releasing, and it occurred to him that she had been carrying a great deal of weight and had been doing it alone for quite some time. When they stopped, she did not immediately pull away. She stayed with her forehead against his in the lamplight, her hand still along his jaw. "In my people's custom," she said quietly, "when an orc woman stays, it means she has decided. I want you to know that. I do not do this and then walk away." "In my nature," Seth said, equally quiet, "when I start building something I do not stop in the middle. I want you to know that too." She made a small sound, the not quite laugh, but softer, warmer. Then she straightened and picked up the deposition from the table and checked the edges to make sure the ink was dry. "We should sleep," she said. "The council session is at dawn. The deposition needs a witness signature," he said. She looked at him. "Dovell the miller," he said. "His house is 20 steps away. He will still be awake, because millers always are." She looked at the document. Then she looked at him with an expression that was pure, warm, uncomplicated admiration, the kind that he had been working toward his whole life without knowing what it would feel like when it arrived. "Go knock on his door," she said. He went and knocked on Dovell's door, and Dovell was indeed still awake, and witnessed the deposition with flour-dusted hands and the good sense to ask no questions. And by the time Seth returned, Kasha had cleared the table and was standing at the window looking out over the lamplight of Cairnhallow's Main Street. He put the witness deposition on the table and stood beside her. Below them the town was quiet and the river ran its dark path through the valley, and the standing stones on the far ridge were just visible against the sky. The clan camp's fires burned in rows to the south. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Kasha said, "I am glad I pulled you back from that ledge." "So am I," Seth said. She reached out without looking and took his hand. He held it with the same certainty with which she had held his collar on the moor, and they stood there in the window while Cairnhallow slept around them. The border council session convened in the great hall of the castle on the basalt outcrop, and it was everything Seth had expected a regional political negotiation to be. Cold stone walls, long tables, people in expensive clothing, pretending to be reasonable while being expensive in exactly the wrong ways. There were 12 council members, 6 human representatives from the settlements west of the Greymark, 6 clan representatives from the east, with a neutral registrar from the Crown Circuit Court presiding. Fenwick was not there himself. He had sent a factor, a sharp-faced man named Aldrich Voss, who wore Fenwick's house colors and carried himself with the specific confidence of someone who was not worried about the outcome, because he had arranged the outcome in advance. Seth testified first, at Kasha's request. He was precise, professional, and technically detailed in a way that was hard to argue with because it required argument on equal technical ground. He described the Harrow Bluff ledge, the drill marks, the waste distribution pattern, the instrument type, the location relative to the boundary markers. He cross-referenced the geological context, the calcite vein beneath the limestone, its alignment with the Darkwell seam's westward extent. He produced the witness deposition. Aldrich Voss attempted twice to argue that the marks were natural geological features, and twice Seth walked him through the specific technical differences in enough detail that Voss's own technical man, Fenwick's surveyor, a nervous-looking individual who had clearly not been briefed to expect this level of counter-expertise, went increasingly quiet. The registrar, whose name was Madame Sewell, was a woman of about 60 who had the manner of someone who had heard every kind of nonsense the borderlands could produce and had run out of patience for it while still in her 30s. She let Seth's testimony proceed uninterrupted and asked 3 sharp, intelligent, clarifying questions at the end. Then she noted for the record that the deposition constituted prima facie evidence of mineral survey trespass predating the Accord's revocation. Kasha testified after him, and she was something to witness. She did not raise her voice. She did not invoke emotion or injury or injustice. She laid out the trade history of Clan Darkwolf's relationship with the eastern settlements in 12 years of documented fact market circuit records, grain purchase agreements, road maintenance contributions, bridge repair co-investments, and then she laid next to it, with the same measured voice, the documented economic stake that Fenwick had in the Darkwell seam without the Accord's constraints. And then she made the offer. Clan Darkwolf proposes a negotiated mineral access agreement, she said, addressing the registrar directly. A 50-year lease of the Darkwell seam to a development consortium that includes both the human settlement interests and the clan's designated economic body, with royalty payments to the clan at a rate set by the Crown's assessor, and a permanent millwright and engineering maintenance post to be held by a qualified neutral party to oversee the works. The hall went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when something has been said that everyone can see is obviously reasonable, and everyone on the obstructing side is trying to find the flaw in. Aldrich Voss said that Lord Fenwick required full control of the extraction rights. Madame Sewell said that Lord Fenwick's requirements were noted. Kasha said that Clan Darkwolf was prepared to support an appeal to the Crown if the Council declined to act, and that the appeal would include the trespass documentation and a full account of the Accord's revocation history. Aldrich Voss said that Fenwick would review the proposal. Seth, sitting at the testimony table with his hands folded in front of him, said nothing at all, because Kasha did not need him to say anything. What she needed was for the Council to vote. They recessed for 2 hours. Seth spent those 2 hours at the grain mill with Dovell, beginning the sluice gate bearing work because the work was there and waiting, and his hands wanted something to do. He had the lower bearing cleared and the new timber seeded and keyed within the 2 hours, and when the council messenger came to tell him that Madame Sewell had called the session back, he had sawdust on his jacket and the clean feeling of a structure returning to function. The council voted 8-4 for the negotiated access agreement. Voss cast Fenwick's proxy vote against and made noises about appeal. Madame Sewell noted the appeal process, and then noted also that pending any appeal the Accord's territorial boundaries were reinstated as of today's date, meaning Fenwick's current survey crew on the Darkwell seam land was in violation of reinstated treaty law and would be required to withdraw within 24 hours under Crown authority. The warband did not come down from the seam that morning, because one of Kasha's clan representatives had ridden out at first light to tell the elder to wait. The elder had waited. The 24-hour withdrawal order reached Fenwick's surveyors that afternoon. They withdrew. Seth was back at the mill when Kasha found him, mid-afternoon, with the lead fill set in the millstone crack and the iron banding being measured out on the mill floor. She came through the mill door and stopped, watching him work for a moment before he heard her. He straightened, saw her face, and set down his tools. She had been carrying something for days, weeks, probably months, and it was off her now, or most of it was. The lines of her shoulders were different. She looked lighter, and because she was already the most striking person he had seen in years, lighter made her devastating. "It passed?" he asked. "It passed." She crossed the mill floor to him. "The seam access agreement goes to the Crown's assessor for final terms. It will take time. Voss will appeal. Fenwick will look for other angles." She stopped in front of him. "But the war is not happening today, and the evidence of prior trespass is in the record, which makes every other angle harder." "You did that," he said. "We did that," she said, and the way she said it was not modest performance, it was simple accuracy. "I could not have arrived here in time without the Greymark path. I could not have used the bridge trespass evidence without your professional testimony. I could not have crossed the Heron Vale." "The Heron Vale," he said. "I've been trying not to think about that." "Which part?" "All of it." He held her gaze. "Specifically the part where the bridge went into the river while we were still on it." Her amber eyes were warm and direct. "Seth, Kasha, I told you last night that when an orc woman stays, she has decided." She stepped closer. "I want to know what comes after the mill is finished." He thought about the contract. 2 weeks of work, maybe 10 days if he pushed. Then back to Brackhill Town and the small house on the millwright's lane, and contracts here and there across the eastern reaches. And Cairn Hallow, which sat in the middle of the route between the clan's eastern territory and the human settlement line. "The council's negotiated access agreement needs a mill built at the seam site," he said, thinking as he spoke. "To process the ore, that is at least 6 months of work, probably more. I would need to be based here in Cairn Hallow." She was watching him. "And the bridge at Harrow Bluff," he continued. "It needs rebuilding properly. Not the survey ledge, I mean a crossing. A real one. That is another contract, and the logical base for it would be here." "You would need lodging," she said. "I would. There is a house on the ridge road above the mill. It belongs to the clan's trade office. It has been empty for 2 seasons. She paused. "I am in Cairn Hallow 6 months out of every 12, managing the trade circuit." Seth looked at her steadily. "Is that an offer?" "It is an observation," she said, "which you may do with what you like." He reached out and took hold of her vambrace, the left one, the one he had noticed fraying on the second day of the moor walk, which she had relaced when he pointed it out, and held it, not pulling, just anchoring. "I want to make something that lasts," he said. "That is the only ambition I have ever had. I want to build things that hold weight for longer than I will. And I want," he stopped, because feelings were harder to be precise about than structural assessments, but he tried. "I want to not be alone in the way I have been alone. I want to do the work and come home to someone who is also doing important work and who sees me the way you saw me at the bluff." "How did I see you at the bluff?" she said very quietly. "Like I was worth grabbing." She put her hand over his on her vambrace, covering it. Her grip was steady and sure, the same grip that had held his collar over 40 feet of empty air. "You are worth a great deal more than grabbing," she said. "Though the grabbing was good." He laughed, genuine and warm, and she made the not quite laugh back at him. And then she kissed him the way she had at the river, decided and deliberate and going nowhere. And he pulled her in by the vambrace and kissed her back the way he did everything important, which was with the full weight of his attention and the intention of doing it properly. The mill was dark and smelled of iron and lead and old grain dust, and outside the Heron Vale ran its course through the valley, and across the moor the standing stones stood in their slow circles the way they had stood for 1,000 years. The millstone work took 9 days. Seth worked long and clean, and Dovell hovered with the anxious devotion of a man watching his most important possession be restored to life. And on the 9th afternoon, Seth adjusted the final gate alignment on the sluice and sent the river water through the wheel and stood back and listened to the wheel turn. It groaned at first, 2 seasons of motionlessness making themselves known, and then it found its rhythm, and the stones began to turn, and the mill filled with the deep, purposeful sound of grain being reduced to flour, and Dovell made a sound that Seth suspected he would never admit to making. "That is it," Dovell said, very quietly. "That is exactly it." Seth cleaned his tools and packed them, and looked at the wheel turning and felt the satisfaction that was better than pride, the satisfaction of a thing being as it should. That night there was a small celebration in the Crow and Hammer common room. Dovell had organized it with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been waiting years to host it, and half the town came, and the clan representatives came, and Kasha sat beside Seth at the long table and ate and talked and laughed in a way he had not yet seen her do, easy and present, at home in her own skin among people who knew her. Her 3 brothers were in the clan contingent. He had not known they were here until she pointed them out, 3 large orc men at the end of the table who had been watching Seth with a range of expressions from cautious to actively skeptical. Kasha did not manage or soften this. She introduced Seth with the same directness she brought to everything. "These are my brothers, Vork, Hadden Rog. This is Seth Cooper. He is the millwright who gave expert testimony before the council and helped me cross the Heronvale when the Millhaven Bridge went down." The 3 brothers processed this. Hadden, the middle one, Seth guessed from his general air of mediating between the aggressive eldest and the youngest who was still finding his footing, said, "You crossed the Heronvale in spate." "On the Millhaven Bridge," Seth said, "before it collapsed." "After we were on it," Kasha said with the ghost smile. Hadden looked at Vork. Something passed between them. Rog, the youngest, leaned forward with undisguised interest. "She doesn't cross rope bridges," Rog said cheerfully, with the specific tone of a youngest sibling about to share information his eldest sibling would prefer he not. "Rog," Kasha said. "Everyone in the clan knows," Rog said, untroubled. "The big wooden bridge at the East Farm crossing, she goes the long way around every time rather than—" "Thank you, Rog," Kasha said pleasantly. "She crossed the rope bridge on the 2nd day," Seth said, because he was not going to let this go uncorrected. "She crossed it well." He looked at Vork, who was the one who mattered. "She crossed it because it needed to be crossed, and she crossed it. That is the accurate account." Vork studied him for a long moment with the assessment he recognized from Kasha's own eyes, the same amber measuring quality, the same stillness. "You are going to stay in Cairn Hallow," Vork said. "It was not a question." "I have contracts here," Seth said. "The ore mill at the Darkwell seam site when the access agreement is settled, the Harrow Bluff Bridge, and whatever else the moor needs built." He paused. "And other reasons." Vork looked at Kasha. Kasha looked back at her eldest brother with an expression that was entirely clear. "This is decided, and I am telling you, not asking you." Vork nodded once. The kind of nod that means all right then. Hadden handed Seth a cup of the dark moorland ale and said, "Welcome to the most complicated family in the eastern reaches," with the tone of a man who means it as both a warning and an invitation. Seth drank the ale. It was excellent. He was still at the table an hour later when Kasha leaned against his shoulder, not performing it, not signaling anything to anyone, just leaning, because she was tired and the weight was where it wanted to be. He put his arm around her without making a thing of it, and she stayed there, and Rog and Hadden talked across the table, and the fire burned low and warm, and the mill wheel turned outside in the dark, doing what it had been built to do. 3 weeks after the council session, Aldrich Voss arrived in Cairn Hallow with a letter from Lord Fenwick, and an expression like a man carrying rotten wood he had been told was good timber. The letter made a counter-proposal to the access agreement that reduced the clan's royalty share to 15% and removed the neutral maintenance post. Kasha read it with Seth beside her in the trade office on the Ridge Road, and she set it down on the table and was quiet for a moment. "He is going to do this forever," she said. Negotiate to a point, then step back, then negotiate again, bleeding the timeline until the Crown's assessor changes, or Madame Sewell retires, or a different political wind blows. Yes, Seth said. That is exactly what he is going to do. She looked at him. What is your professional assessment of the Darkwell seam or extraction timeline if it does not begin this season? The water table at the seam site, Seth said, who had been doing the preliminary mill surveys for 2 weeks now and knew the ground as well as he knew anything. If the sluice and drainage works are not installed before the autumn rains, the seam's lower level floods. Fenwick's geological man has to know this. If extraction does not begin this season, it cannot begin for at minimum another 2 years, and by then the political situation may have shifted enough that the accord's status changes again. So he needs the seam access resolved before autumn, Kasha said. He cannot admit that he needs it, Seth said, because that removes his leverage. They looked at each other. What if, Kasha said carefully, the clan made a different offer, not the 50-year lease, a full purchase? The clan buys the extraction rights outright from Fenwick at a fair price assessed by the Crown, financed by a consortium of the clan's trade partners in the human settlements. Fenwick gets his money. He loses the long-term extraction rights that he wanted, but he gets immediate capital. No more negotiation. Seth turned this over. Who are the trade partners with capital? 3 merchants in Brackhill Town, a grain factor in Harrow Town, and the Crow and Hammer Inn. She paused, and possibly a millwright who has a reputation that would give the consortium professional credibility with the Crown's assessor. Seth looked at her levelly. You want me to invest in the Darkwell Seam Purchase Consortium? I want you to consider it, she said. It would give you a direct stake in the ore mill contract, a seat in the consortium partnership, and a long-term reason to be based in Cairn Hallow beyond the individual contracts. He thought about the small house on the Millwright's Lane in Brackhill Town, the way it looked at the end of a long contract when he came back to it, functional and quiet and completely still. He thought about the ridge house above the mill that had been empty for 2 seasons. He thought about the wheel turning. My capital is not large, he said. I have what I have saved from 10 years of contracts and what Ren Aldgate left me when he died, which was his tool library and a modest sum. The tool library is worth more than you think, Kasha said, practically. Tool libraries are assessed as professional capital by the Crown's guild courts. Combined with your reputation and your formal testimony on the trespass evidence, which gives you evidentiary standing in the access dispute, your consortium contribution is not merely monetary. You have been thinking about this for a while, he said. Since the council vote, she admitted. I was thinking about the timeline and I kept arriving at the same problem and then I kept arriving at the same solution and then I kept arriving at the same person at the center of the solution. Seth was quiet for a moment, looking at the letter on the table. Then he looked at her. If I put my name in the consortium, he said, I am putting myself in permanent opposition to Fenwick. He is a lord. I am a millwright. That is a significant thing to do. I know, she said. I am not asking you to do it lightly. I'm not taking it lightly. He picked up the letter, turned it over, read the back as if there might be something useful on it. There was not. I am trying to think about it as it is, which is a decision about what I want the next 10 years to look like. And, he looked at her, and the thing that had settled into his chest at the river was there still, solid and certain. I want them to look like this, he said. The work, the moor, the council, the hard problems that need solving and the mill that turns when you fix it properly. He paused. And you, she held his gaze. The consortium proposal will be on Madame Sewell's desk by week's end. It will take another month to assess. Fenwick will be difficult. The autumn rain deadline puts pressure on everyone. She set this all out with the same measured precision she used for everything. This is not simple. I told you, I don't do things because they're simple. He set the letter down. Get me the partnership document. I'll review it with a builder's eye and tell you if there are structural flaws. You will probably find several, she said. Good. That is what builders are for. He drafted revisions to the partnership document over 3 evenings at the Ridge House, working at the table with Kasha across from him, reviewing the clan's legal documents, the lamplight warm between them. The house was bare still previous occupants' furniture, no personal effects beyond his tool bag and her travel pack, but it had the good bones of a place that had been built to last. Stone walls, a timber floor that had been properly laid, a hearth that drew well. Seth had repaired a cracked lintel the second evening without being asked about it, just because it was there and he had the tools. Kasha had watched him do it from across the room, and then she had come over and handed him the right chisel before he had to ask. He had looked at her. "I know tools," she said. "I know you do," he said, which was not what he meant, and she knew it. The partnership document went to Madame Sewell's court with 6 signatories. Kasha as the clan Darkwolf's representative, 3 Brackhill merchants, the Crow and Hammer's owner who was a sharp-tongued woman named Bet who had been doing business with the clan for 8 years, and Seth Cooper, millwright, as professional capital contributor and named technical director of the extraction works. Fenwick's response came fast, which told Seth that the autumn timeline pressure was real. He rejected the consortium purchase outright and proposed instead a lease with a 20% clan royalty. Better than his previous 15, but still short of what the original agreement had established. Kasha rejected it. She sent back a single-page letter that reiterated the purchase offer with a fixed deadline, except by the first new moon of autumn or the consortium would seek a crown-compelled sale based on the documented trespass evidence. Seth read the letter before she sent it. It was clean, measured, and absolutely backed by Madame Sewell's record, because Kasha had spent the previous 2 weeks making sure Madame Sewell understood that the trespass evidence was not going away. "You are going to make him very angry," Seth said. "I know," she said, "but he cannot mind the seam if the water table rises in autumn. He needs our money more than he needs to make us wait." She sealed the letter. "He will accept. He will do it badly and angrily, and he will try to find revenge in small ways for years. But he will accept." She was right. The response came 15 days before the new moon of autumn, a conditional acceptance, the conditions being minor enough that Kasha granted them without comment, and the consortium purchase of the Darkwell seam extraction rights was signed, witnessed, and registered with the Crown Circuit Court on a bright autumn morning in Cairn Hallow, while the Heron Vale ran clear and cold below the basalt outcrop. Seth signed his name on the document, Seth A. Cooper, technical director, and felt the kind of thing he felt when the wheel started turning. The standing stones on the far ridge were gray and still against the pale autumn sky. Below the town, the clan's trade camp was a working village now, the temporary hide tents supplemented by the beginnings of permanent structures that Kasha had been negotiating with the town council for the past month. It was a slow, careful, incremental thing. Humans and orcs in the same town did not become easy overnight, and Kasha had no patience for anyone who said it should, but it was happening. Seth had built 3 of the new structures, working alongside the clan's own builders in a pragmatic partnership that had been awkward for the first 2 days and functional from the 3rd onward, because building was a language that did not require a great deal of common tongue to communicate. He had learned 3 orc construction terms, for level, for plumb, and for good, and found he used them more often than he expected. On the evening of the signing, Kasha came to find him at the mill site, where he was doing the preliminary drainage survey for the extraction works, even though the light was nearly gone and he should have stopped an hour ago. She came down the hillside path with her iron ring braids loose for the first time in the weeks he had known her, the black hair falling around her shoulders, and she was still in her travel leathers, but she had removed the vambraces, and without them her arms were bare and the evening light made the green of her skin warm. She sat on a flat stone at the edge of the survey site and watched him finish his measurements. He packed his tools, came and sat beside her. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment, looking down at the valley. The Heron Vale caught the last of the light, "I have been the person carrying the clan's future for 4 years," she said. "I have been very focused on it. I do not think I knew how much space it was taking up until tonight when it was settled." "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "Like a load that has been set down. You keep tensing for the weight that is not there." He understood that in his body the way he always understood structural things. "It will take time," he said. "You learn what it feels like to stand straight again." She leaned against him the way she had at the crow and hammer, wholly without performance. "Seth," she said, "yes. You built things this season that will last 50 years. The mill, the sluice works, the partnership document." She paused. "What do you want to build next?" He was quiet because the answer was in him and he wanted to say it exactly right. "The bridge at Harrow Bluff," he said. "A proper crossing, not a survey ledge. Stone foundation piers, timber arch wide enough for a wagon, something that the moor can use for a century." He felt her listening. "And the ore mill at the seam." And he stopped. "And," she said. He took a breath. "I want to add a room onto the ridge house," he said. "A proper workshop. Windows to the north for the light, stone floor, tool storage built into the walls." He paused. "If that is something you would want." She turned to look at him. Her amber eyes were very direct, very warm. "A workshop," she said. "For the long contracts," he said. "When I am based here, which I intend to be if you want me to be." She reached up and took his face in both hands the way she had the night of the deposition, one on each side, deliberate and certain, as if she was making absolutely sure he understood what she was about to say. "I pulled you back from a ledge 3 weeks ago," she said. "I have not yet let go." He put his hands over hers. "I know," he said. "I know you haven't." She kissed him the way the standing stone stood, without hurry, without doubt, with the particular certainty of something that had decided to be permanent. They stayed on the survey stone while the last light left the sky and the stars came out over the moor. The same stars that had been there when the standing stone rings were placed, and would be there long after the Darkwell ore mill was built and worn to ruin. And below them the Heronvale ran on in the dark, doing what rivers do, which is find their way. In the morning he would start the drainage survey in earnest, and she would write the first report to the consortium partners, and the ridge house would need its workshop addition planned out properly, which he had been thinking about since she said yes with her hands on his face. The Harrow Bluff Bridge contract was already drafted. Madame Sewell's court had approved it the same day as the access agreement, and he had the stone foundation measurements from the survey work, and he knew exactly what the bridge needed, the same way he always knew, that immediate and certain knowledge of how a thing should be built that Wren Aldgate had called the millwright's gift. He would build the bridge so it would stand 100 years. He would build the ore mill so it would stand 200. He would build the workshop to the north light and fill it with tools and come home to it from the work, and she would be there with her iron ring braids and her amber eyes and her absolute, unshakable certainty about the things she had decided. He was, Seth Cooper thought, standing on solid ground. The moor was wide and cold and beautiful in the autumn light, and the standing stones held their slow witness, and the Heronvale found its way through the valley the way it always had, and in Cairn Hallow the grain mill turned.